There are two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" Thus begins one of, if not the, greatest commencement speeches ever delivered. At a graduation ceremony on the 21st of May 2005, writer David Foster Wallace stood up to a podium and addressed the new graduates of Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio, with a speech that would later be heard all over the world. The speech was called "This is Water" and sought to emphasise the real gift given to these students by their liberal arts education: the freedom to think and derive meaning from seemingly meaningless events. When delivering this speech, Wallace rejected the overly inspirational and heroic commencement speech stereotypes that act to placate, reassure, and promise the graduates of futures full of prosperity in favour of providing a more realistic worldview that highlighted the mundane, boring, and repetitive nature of adult life that all the students would be finding out about very soon. Wallace had sought to point out the uncomfortable truths about us as humans. Just as the two fish did not understand water, we too often, either by choice or out of naivety, do not acknowledge the most obvious elements of reality that we all see and share. The most uncomfortable of these elements is the fact that we are the centre of our own universe, and that we unconsciously deem everything we experience to be directly related to us in one way or another. Wallace describes this unconscious belief as our default setting. And it is this default setting that, if not intercepted by our conscious thoughts, that can make life miserable for us when caught up in the tedium of the everyday adult world. Wallace believed that this interception is where the real value of the student's education lies, as he went on to elaborate on that May morning in 2005. The ability to rethink and remove yourself from that default setting, Wallace claimed, is a skill that will serve the students in greater ways the older they get. And I submit that this is what the real, no bullshit value of your liberal arts education is supposed to be about. How to keep from going through your comfortable, prosperous, respectable adult life dead, unconscious, a slave to your head and to your natural default setting of being uniquely, completely, imperially alone, day in and day out. However, as Wallace then notes, the graduates are yet to experience the true essence of day in, day out. By this, Wallace is referring to the tedious routines associated with full-time work in the adult world, a routine slightly hinted at in education, but never fully realised until you're in it. The indistinguishable days, the waning enthusiasm, and the general feeling of slowly wasting away. Wallace then provides an example of such a day. Imagine an average adult day of rising early in the morning to go to your challenging white-collar office job where you work between 8 to 10 hours. At the end of the day, you're exhausted and simply want to get home to have some you time before sleeping early to ensure you're up and ready to do it all over again. But suddenly you remember you need to do some shopping. And so, instead of shooting straight home, you sit in rush hour traffic filled with obnoxiously large, planet-destroying SUVs and Hummers, just to arrive at an overcrowded, brightly lit shop where you push your wonky trolley down confusing aisles before standing in a checkout line that resembles the very traffic you just sat through to get to the shop in the first place. The people around you look dead, the muzak is annoying, the line moves at a snail's pace, and off to the side, one fat woman is screaming at her kid. But eventually, you arrive at the till, pass all your things through, pay for the shopping, and just before leaving get told to "have a nice day" by a voice that Wallace describes as the absolute voice of death. Thanking her, you take your things, plonk them in your car, and emerge right back out into traffic where you slowly nudge your way home. That is what Wallace describes as the average day in adult life, a day that the students may have sampled, maybe during a job during summer break, but not fully integrated into their everyday, their routine, their life, yet. But Wallace does not leave this depressing example at its seemingly futile conclusion. Instead, Wallace says that this is where the ability to choose how you interpret these scenarios presents itself. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think, and if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm gonna be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop, because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. By changing your way of thinking, you can interpret these scenarios in ways that readjust this self-centered and misery-inducing attitude. Perhaps, Wallace suggests, one of the obnoxiously large SUVs contains a man who had been in a terrible crash and can only feel safe driving in a big car. Perhaps, inside the Hummer that cut you off is a scared father rushing his sick child to the hospital. Perhaps the people in the line at the store are just as unhappy and annoyed as you are. And perhaps, the fat woman screaming at her kid is just stressed from staying up for 3 nights straight in a hospital holding the hand of her husband who is dying of bone cancer. It is unlikely these scenarios are correct. However, Wallace says, they are possible and can at least pull you out of the default self-centeredness we tend to spend the majority of our time in. However, Wallace acknowledges that making these changes to your thinking is not easy. Going from a self-centered monkey to an incredibly courteous, understanding and well-adjusted human is not achievable in one fell swoop of cognitive rewiring. It takes time. But if you really learn how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know there are other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow consumer hell type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that made the stars, love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things deep down. This quote perfectly sums up the main themes associated with the work of David Foster Wallace: the embracement of the ordinary and the acknowledgement of the pockets of meaning in ordinary moments. David Foster Wallace was born on the 21st of February 1962 in Ithaca, New York. Wallace's mother was an English teacher and his father was a philosophy professor. Having 2 parents engaged in professions associated with the intellect must have served to steer Wallace in the same direction, as he went down the liberal arts path himself and in 1985 received a BA from Amherst College. 2 years later, whilst pursuing a master's degree in creative writing, Wallace published his first book titled The Broom of the System. This book would mark the beginning of a successful writing career for Wallace, a career which hit its high watermark in 1996 when Wallace published his second novel, Infinite Jest. The book tackled many themes like addiction, success, entertainment and suicide, but it also tackled the ever-present theme laden in a lot of Wallace's work: the humanity lying tucked beneath an indifferent, capitalist, mundane world stage. In the years that followed the publication of Infinite Jest, Wallace would produce collections of fiction, essays and journalism. In the meantime, he wrestled with his next big novel, but unfortunately was never able to complete it, and now never will, as he sadly took his own life on the 12th of September 2008. That book would later be pieced together and published by Wallace's editor and friend, Michael Peach. Wallace had left a somewhat organised manuscript on his desk for his wife to find, alongside other additional pages and notes scattered around his room and computer. After many days of slowly piecing the manuscripts together, the book was published in 2011 under the name The Pale King. When asked about the novel a year before its publication, Peach would comment on the Pale King's focus on the mundane. Wallace takes agonizing daily events like standing in lines, traffic jams, and horrific bus rides, things we all hate, and turns them into moments of laughter and understanding. Although David did not finish the novel, it is a surprisingly whole and satisfying reading experience that showcases his extraordinary imaginative talents and his mixing of comedy and deep sadness in scenes from daily life. This mix Peach comments on would perfectly encapsulate not just The Pale King, but also the speech Wallace gave to the Kenyon College graduating class of 2005. The humour and the sadness rolled up into one burst of truth, umbrellaed by a meaning of our own choosing. Despite the idyllic nature of Wallace's finding meaning in the ordinary advice, or the constant readjusting of other people's actions into justifications that warrant them, some people will just not be able to see these two things as true. And Wallace concedes this. Wallace concedes that the mysticism of everyday banalities is not necessarily true, in the same way the scared SUV driver may not be true, or the soon-to-be widowed screaming at her child might not be true, or the worried Hummer driver with the sick son might not be true. When you strip this all away, the only truth you are left with isn't the factual accuracy of your assumptions, but instead the undeniable truth that you have the freedom to choose how to think, and the benefits this choosing will have not just for yourself, but for the people around you. The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline, and being able truly to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad, petty, little unsexy ways every day. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. In this commencement speech, Wallace had not promised the students long, happy and fulfilling lives out of the gate. He knew the road they were about to go down and did not try to sweep it under the rug for the Kenyon College graduating class of 2005 to discover days, weeks, months, years down the line that their likely idyllic view ahead was a mirage. Thus, Wallace sought not to ignore this reality, but to prop it up front and centre for all students to see. And instead of scaring these students, Wallace outlines the very tools their last 3 years in education had granted them, whilst also showing these students how best to use them not only in a professional setting, but in a personal one too. It is of no question to me that the speech Wallace gave on that May morning remained in the minds of all the graduating students. Yet I would have to imagine that the importance of the speech only grew over time. When traffic piled up further than they could see, when the line at the shops snaked around the aisles, when the boss shouted and humiliated them, when they got cut off by SUVs and Hummers, when seemingly meaningless day after seemingly meaningless day slipped past into infinity. I'm sure there were times when these students thought back to May 21st, 2005, to the image of David Foster Wallace standing at the podium in the dry morning, and to the valuable lesson he had taught them that day. And it is at this point that they would say to themselves, "This is water. This is water."